Welcome everyone. As guys jump onto the call, thank you for making time to be with us today. We're super excited to have all of you with us. Those from Nairobi, those who are joining us from other parts of the world. We're excited that you could make the time to be with us. And as Resource Global host, this Resource Global is an organization that's just aiming to transform our cities all over the world, based on a belief that if Christians are empowered, resourced, equipped to understand why God has put them in the different spaces they're in, and they begin living that out, we'll begin seeing a transformative effect in our sectors, in the marketplace, and overall in our cities and countries. And so we're super excited to have such events that can spur us on, encourage us, begin this movement of people just changing their mindset to understand why God has put us where we are, and hopefully begin seeing that change start to come in. And I'm excited to have Tommy with me. Tommy is the president of Resource Global, and I'll hand over to him to quickly introduce our amazing speaker today, who will help us as we begin this change in mindset. So Tommy, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mwangi. I look forward, I've gotten the chance to visit your wonderful city on numerous occasions. I look forward to coming, if not this year, early next year. I mean, Nairobi has completely changed and God is doing something. It is the Silicon Valley of Africa. And I look forward to hearing some of the things that emerges, some of the leaders. And that's one of the reasons why we really want to come and just get to know you guys and serve. I will introduce Katherine, who has impacted my life ever since I read her book, Every Great Endeavor. And somehow or another, she answered my email one day and we've developed a friendship. But more so, the co-author of her book, Tim Keller, also influenced me because this is how Resource Global was built. Tim talks about this whole gospel ecosystem, that no one person, no one entity can do it alone. A church and pastors have to work together. Nonprofit leaders have to work together. Marketplaces have to work together to engage each other to really be able to love and care for their city. And so for me, having worked in 12 years in the telecom industry, then now in ministry as a pastor, then in the seminary, I started realizing, Lord, how do we really engage our cities? And the thing is, you got to create those partnerships. How do we do it globally? And so our focus are young Christian marketplace leaders who we believe are going to make an impact for the gospels in their city. And so one of the best individuals I think could really always do that is Katherine Leary Alsdorf. And Katherine, you may need to remind me again what your current title is, but you are an author, you are a speaker, you also helped to found the Gotham City Faith and Work Center, Faith and Work over in New York for Redeemer. You also started working with City to City as their vice president of Faith and Work. You are the co-author with Tim on Every Good Endeavor. And for a number of years, you were a very, very successful CEO in the Silicon Valley. And so you have operated in both worlds, working with pastors, CEOs, and have been a very, very accomplished leader. So thank you for this time and for joining us here in Nairobi.
All right, thank you. I think that's my lead in here. I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves with a question. And while you're thinking, I'll do a little small talk. So the question is, what is your biggest question about how to fully integrate your faith with your work? And I want you to answer that whether you're working out in the secular world or you're working as a pastor. What is your biggest question about how to integrate your faith and your work? And we're going to do this live with you speaking. Other things we'll do during the hour or the half hour will be by chat, but I'd like to just go around the room. And I will say I have been to Nairobi, but not since, I think, 1996. So I suspect it has changed a lot. I have a brother who worked with World Harvest Mission, which is now called Surge, in Western Uganda, in Bundabujo, Uganda. So Nairobi was a stopping point. So I've been to Nairobi and Kajabi, but those are the only places in Kenya that I've visited. So I'm hoping that was enough small talk for you to be able to think about your answer to the question, What is your biggest question about how to live out faith and work? So let's just, I'm going to call on you if that's okay. And so just if everyone would unmute for the moment so that we can do this as quickly as possible. And Mwangi, why don't I start with you? Nobody's off the hook here.
I thought I was going to escape answering this question.
No escape.
All right. I think for me, the biggest question is, how do I change the mindset of those around me, especially other Christians who I'm working in the same space with, to sort of understand where I'm trying to come from. So when it comes to faith and work, how do I get people to buy into what I'm trying to see? How do I change the mindset of those around me?
Okay, great. Anthony, I'm not sure I'll say your names correctly, so forgive me, but I think there's only one Anthony.
Yes, so that would likely be me. Thank you everyone for coming and showing up. Great to meet you, Catherine. Tommy Lee, I am here on the invite from Tony Chen. And Dr. Guthrie says he's hello. Great to be with you guys all. I'm in Chicago at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. And the question I'm wrestling with recently is, as a higher education administrator, what can I do in the system to encourage more vocational formation in the learners and the staff members?
Thank you. That's great. And Krista and Selen?
Hi guys, Christy from Pretoria, South Africa here. I think one of the biggest things that most of the people that I wrestle with is just how do you, in the monotony of life and the day-to-day work, how do you understand God's purpose for you and your work, you know, without making some sort of clear separation between your work and your faith?
That's great. Thank you. And Mangli, David?
Hi, Catherine. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
So I'm here invited. I'm actually part of the cohort in Nairobi. Thank you, Mwangi, for inviting me for this call. And the biggest question is, when you're dealing with kingdom business, especially when you're dealing with the youth, I'm in the tech space where I get young people to just experience their creativity and everything. That space, I'll echo what Mwangi said. How do you get them to understand where you're coming from? Especially in the tech space, there's an analogy of, so how are we going to run kingdom business at the same time in the technical way? Because it's more technical than verbal in that space.
Yes.
Great.
That's great. Toby, how about you?
Catherine, I spent about 12 years in the business world, and even now in the ministry, I struggle with the whole idea of ambition. As individuals, we are supposed to do our very, very best and be successful in everything that we do. How does ambition play a role in that integration of faith and work? When does ambition go out of control, and how do we use that ambition to really serve the kingdom?
That's great. Thank you. All right, Toby.
Maybe this is a derivative of some of the questions that have been asked, but the question is around the kingdom value of something. For instance, I used to be a lawyer, putting a deal together and drafting a contract. The kingdom value of something that is at one level seemingly disconnected from God's work in
Thank you. That's great. Titus.
Thank you for the opportunity, Mwangi. I think for me, the biggest question is like how to bring that kingdom difference to work, especially to cultures that are already established. Say you're coming to an organization that's has a very heavy power culture. So like, how do I bring my faith And how do I let my faith impact how I work in such a culture? And especially when, say, I'm a new manager and I want to do things differently.
That's great. Tony, hi.
Hi, Catherine. Good to see you again. I think my question is, I just think about actually more from your perspective as you've been working through this topic. What do you think is the greatest misperception about work-faith integration?
Great, thank you. And Cedric.
Hi, Catherine.
Hi.
Well, sorry, I just joined in, but I'm open just to hear what are the things that I can take home about work and faith.
Great, thank you. And Harry.
Okay, thank you. My biggest struggle has always been, I'm in business, so I meet a lot of clients. I'm also in the tech space. And most of the time, the discussions with the clients, they're very focused about the project, about the business and what the client requires. So my biggest struggle has always been, how do you bring in your faith without without the clients feeling that you are, deviating from the subject matter? And how do you maximize each and every opportunity just to make sure that at least anybody you come in contact with, you tell them about your faith and you influence them?
Thank you, Harry. And Calvin. So you need to unmute. Okay, I can't hear Calvin, so I'm going to go to someone who is unmuted. Raul?
Hi, Catherine.
A little louder, Raul.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Okay. First of all, thank you. I've been invited by Mr. Mwangi. Just to answer the question, I think my biggest question would be in integrating a secular world or a business that is not related to my faith, and how to bring in my faith in such a business or in such a work environment where they're not related with the faith in any how.
That's great, thank you. And I'm just going to do one more just for the interest of time. In the interest of time, so Lydia.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Lydia. I'm in Nairobi. And in answer to the question, maybe it's not so much how to integrate your faith, and well, it is actually in your work. It's when you know what God wants you to do, and positioning yourself in a way that you can serve effectively as God has sent you. I think that's my challenge.
To overcoming the obstacles when you know what God wants you to be doing.
Yes.
Thank you. That's helpful, and I hope it's helpful at least to hear some of the others of you on this call, and that this will be the beginning of an ongoing exploration of what God has in mind for this cohort of people in Nairobi. And it certainly gives me a little bit of an understanding of where you are. I'm going to start out with a little bit of my own story, and then my idea is to just basically go through the biblical story of why we work, what God's intent, God's plan for our work is, what's gone wrong with it, and what hope we have for it. And then we'll have some time for Q&A that will start at around 1:40. So if you have questions along the way, feel free to just enter them into chat, and Tommy and Laura will be looking at those and making sure that they get responded to by the end. I also will have us answer a few things in chat during the course of just the dialogue to keep some interaction going here. But just a little bit of my own story. I did grow up going to church, but walked away when I was about 16 for the kind of reasons that most teenagers who walk away do, and didn't come back to even thinking about or exploring who Jesus was until I was almost 40 years old. So for a long period of time, I was pursuing life, and in particular career, in the way that the world would pursue it, particularly people who were ambitious and desiring to, be well established in life, kind of thing. I did come back to faith in my late 30s at Redeemer through the teaching of Tim Keller. And I think the two keys were, there was a little bit of, is this all there is? Is success all there is to life? And not that I was all that successful, but is the pain of work and the pursuit of success all there is to life? And Tim Keller, I think unusually for preachers, talked a lot about the importance or the difference the gospel makes in your work life. If he hadn't talked about work, I think I would have walked away because it wouldn't have been relevant to the thing that I spent most of my life doing. It did take a long time for me to finally succumb, is the way I think of it. I felt like God had my heel and wouldn't let me go, but I was a very resistant convert. And eventually, when he did, I felt like the biggest obstacle I had to overcome was to turn over my career investment and aspirations to him and let him do with it what he will. He, in quick timing, called me to a role of CEO of my company. My CEO, I was a vice president. The CEO had a brain tumor, and I was asked to take his place. And I thought, all right, Lord, you are like hitting me over the head with a brick, saying, this is what I want you to be doing, because I've just, laid it out all before you. But I have no idea how to do this now as a Christian, as a person who seeks to follow you. So that began a 10-year journey in corporate America, very busy with learning how to lead a company, but also very busy with trying to say, Lord, what is different now that I am yours? And putting off the old self and putting on the new became sort of an obsession of mine. I did not feel like at that time in my life the church was very helpful. I felt like what I was hearing mostly were rules. Rules like a Christian in the marketplace will never swear, take the Lord's name in vain. A Christian in the marketplace will always share their faith with other people in the marketplace. A Christian in the marketplace will always have a Bible on their desk so that people can see they're a Christian. They will always be home for dinner with their family. They will never work on Sundays. Just a lot of rules. And I thought, this faith, this new faith of mine is so much bigger than rules. I want to go deeper with this. And so eventually Redeemer called me back to New York from Silicon Valley to help them start a marketplace ministry. And while I felt sorely ill-equipped to do that, I felt extremely knowledgeable about the needs of people in the marketplace and the kinds of things that would make a difference in their life. So that began the journey that almost 20 years ago now of helping equip people for a more vibrant, life-changing, gospel-transforming work. So the book that Tim and I did on called Every Good Endeavor really is a summation of Faith and Work 101 that we felt would, after 10 years of just exploring this with our people, felt like would really make a difference. And the bottom line was none of us out there in the marketplace had enough theological grounding to really figure this out in the challenging gray areas of navigating a culture that didn't share our beliefs about how the world works and who was in charge of the world. So I had to go much deeper than what I was seeing in the minimal number of Faith and Work ministries that I saw out there. And that was just, it was what's it all about? A basic discipleship to those of you who lead ministry, but a discipleship oriented to our work lives. So that led us to this, dig deep into the biblical storyline and compare it and contrast it with the world's storyline for work that that everyone who goes to church is confronted with on a daily basis. So my first question for your chat is, what is the world's story for work? Why does the world tell us we should work? So just put a one-liner into the chat and we'll all get to read that. So if you can open up your screen to reading the chat function. So Tommy, if you can retype that question, what is the world's story for work? Why does the world say we should work? So I'm going to look, so we can retire and not work anymore. And I have certainly lived in that storyline as a Silicon Valley entrepreneur leader. I was counting my corporate stock option valuations and saying, okay, this 21 million when this finally goes is going to suit me fine forever, or whatever that might be. So I was certainly in that, let's see if we could retire early to make money. The world tells us we need to earn a living, build a career. Some will certainly say work is a curse. We have to do it, but it's a curse, and I dread every moment of it. Pay bills, live a comfortable life, live a responsible life, to be remembered, so an identity. So that's great. That's a really good set of questions. And we are all indoctrinated into that mindset far more than we're indoctrinated into the gospel story mindset. So our jobs, if we're pastors, is in 30 minutes a Sunday to reorient everyone into a biblical mindset when at least 40 hours a week they are being indoctrinated into the world's view of work. And so how do we do that? It's a pretty, I think it's probably the biggest change. If you're a leader of change in the world out there, and you talk about how hard it is to change a culture or to change people to do what you want them to do, that's what you're doing as a leader. The biggest change in the world is to get people to live for God instead of live for themselves. And that's really what we're trying to do in a Faith and Work ministry, is to reorient from the world's take on work, which is you're working for yourself. You're working for your own good, to helping them see God's picture, that you're working for God's good and you're working for God's purposes. So if you feel, those of you who said the biggest question is to how to get, Mwenge, you reference to this, how to get other people to see it. Don't be discouraged. I mean, this is the hardest thing to do, is to get people to move from living for themselves to living for God and seeing the world as God sees it. Nonetheless, that's our calling and that's our mission here. So the biblical storyline is not about a set of rules of how to be a Christian at work. It's not even how to share the gospel verbally with other people at work. It's how to bring about deep heart change in ourselves so that we're truly working for God's purposes in God's plan as opposed to for our own purposes. So I just want to go through as briefly as I possibly can an abbreviated version of the biblical storyline so that we're really looking at it as it relates to work, as grounded as we can be, but simply for today. So number one, God's plan for work. So God's plan for work is cosmic in scope. So often our view of our faith is just personal. It's a personal salvation. And what I want us to understand is that we are just fortunate players in this cosmic plan that God has for renewal of the whole world. And if we don't start with that, then our work it's hard to understand why our work matters. If it's all just about us being saved and us going up to heaven when it's all over, then why does your work matter? But we really cling to the broader picture that starts in Genesis and concludes with verses like Romans. In Romans, it says the whole world groans for this redemption. It's a cosmic story that we're a part of. Therefore, our work matters as part of God's cosmic plan. So God's plan for work, it's cosmic in scope. His design is that we are made in his image to continue on, to carry on with his work of creating, his work of cultivating the world. So why didn't he do it himself? Why didn't he name the animals himself? It's because, I mean, he clearly could have. He could have named them better than we did. He could have created cities himself, but he did it because he made us in his image and he delights in seeing us be sub-creators or co-creators with him in the world. It's part of his love language to us that we get to be part of this creative endeavor of bringing the raw materials of this earth into its beautiful fulfillment. So his design for work is that we are made to do this. So often, and a couple of you referred to it, it's at work as this this drudgery that's necessary in life, but it's drudgery. God's plan was that it be this delightful thing where we're participating with him in this good creation. But his design is also that too little work or too much work is not a good thing. So I was in the vein most of my career of too much work. Some of you may be in that, ignoring the need for a rhythm of work and rest. And right now in COVID, there's a whole lot of people in the mode of too little work and worried that their job may end or they may not have sufficient work. There's whole groups of people who struggle with having enough work that's meaningful and productive and puts a roof over their head. So God's plan is that there be a balance between good, productive, fruitful work, but not overwork, not so much work that we're not resting, rejuvenating, and worshiping him on a Sabbath rhythm. So work in God's design is the form in which we make ourselves useful to others and in which other people make themselves useful to us. That's sort of the cosmic picture that we're a part of. I think the Christian church has fallen down on painting that cosmic community picture of work. Secondly, God's plan for work is that it's part of giving his people dignity. there's a huge dignity at work. And I think the brokenness that we're confronted with the most often is work that reduces our human dignity rather than enhances it. And so how can we, as either givers of work to other people or colleagues who are working together with other people, really be embodiments of the dignity of work and sharers of the dignity of work, which really, I think, as much as witnessing verbally to the gospel, witnesses as an embodiment of the gospel with our colleagues and with others that we work with. Just the recognizing that when we're working, when we do work well, with dignity worthy of people made in God's image. And then thirdly, the third part of God's plan for work is the cultural mandate. And I hope all of you have heard that term before, but that idea that God made us to fill the earth with good things, to create cities that flourish. All work, and I think your next session is going to really dig deep into this with Andy Crouch. All work is culture making. Culture, as we live in it, is comprised of the work of all the people that are working on a regular basis. Sometimes the bad work of a few can ruin the culture of many when it comes to the culture of our cities or our communities or our countries. And I'm sure you see that in areas of corruption in your own environment, that it takes very few corrupt people to damage the goodness of the culture around us. But our antidote to that is to work in new culture-making ways, culture-rejuvenating ways, culture-glorifying ways. So work as the cultural mandate to build culture, to create culture, to contribute to culture. And we can't do that alone. So cohorts like this are so essential for being communities of people trying to be redemptive and builders of healthy, flourishing culture in our cities. And then work as service, work as serving the rest of the people in the world. So the famous quote by Martin Luther is that the milkmaid, as she milks the cow and brings the milk to the table of her neighbor, are God's hands serving the needs of others in community. And so often our church has gotten stuck in a dichotomy, and I think this is true in the African church as well as the church in the US, of people who work in the church, the pastor or the ministry, are more important in God's eyes than the milkmaid milking the cow or the tech person creating the software project. And I think one of you said one of the challenges they see is, or what is the biggest challenge I see? And I think one of the biggest ones I see is that work in the church is viewed so often as more important than the work that people are doing in every sector of our society, every sector of our city. I think it's done a huge disservice to God's plan for all of the church to be working in all of the world. So that's my summary of God's plan for work. I've got about 2 minutes left. So Tommy, I'm sorry, I'm gonna really run quickly through, I think, the second part, which is so important, the problem with work. So I just want to break it down to 2 pieces. The problem, work is broken out there in the world. So it's broken right now by a pandemic. It's broken by hurricanes. It's broken by poverty that is cultural poverty. It's broken by lots of things out there that we can't directly control. It's broken in the world, but it's also broken in our hearts. And I would like in your focus as you're moving forward with this to be as focused on what's broken in your own heart, what's broken in the hearts of the people you work with, as you are what's broken in the world out there that needs to be fixed. I'd like us to be Christians who aren't just pointing to that person's broken, but people that are pointing to this is broken in me, that understands that the sin in the world that pains God so much runs through all of us. And hopefully we're being sanctified over time, but we continue to be in our work these sort of factories of idols, our own desires to make work about us, to look good, our own desires for comfort and pleasure, our own desires to have work serve us instead of work serve others, is part of the brokenness of work. And if we can be out there as witnesses of repentance and witnesses of confession and humble repenters of where we've gone wrong, then I think our witness is going to be a whole lot stronger for those who don't know who Jesus is and the power of Jesus's grace and redemption to us. So just to summarize that part, work is broken. Work's broken out there, and God calls us to fight against that and do what we can to redeem that. But work is also broken in here, in our hearts for it. And the more we can recognize the power of the gospel to change the deepest parts of our heart and how we work so that we can serve others more freely, the more we can be part of God's redemptive plan for work in this world. And of course, part 3 is then what's our hope? What's the hope for gospel transformation? And I'm just going to let the rest of your sessions jump into that a little bit more deeply. But I do believe that if without this grounding in the biblical storyline, we really don't have anything to work with as we're talking together besides this is what I think you should do and this is what I think you should do, and a bunch of Pharisaical rules for work that won't really get to the heart of the matter and have us deeply engaging in discerning what God would have us be doing in our very broken world. So I'm going to stop there and turn it over to you, Tommy, for
Catherine, thank you very much. And I have a whole bunch of different questions for you. I know a lot of times we have about 20 minutes, so I want to quickly go over some of the questions. First of all, Catherine, one person mentioned is, how does this tangibly look like on a day-to-day basis? Is it merely holding Bible studies in our work? Is it merely putting a Bible verse on our wall of our work or on our desk? How does that tangibly look like in what we do in our work?
I think the very first step is to spend time with God saying, what does God want me to do this day, this month, this year in my work? What is God's purposes for the most mundane things in my work life? And just spending time alone and then with a friend or a cohort sharing that. I think getting to the heart of God's purposes, and of course that's going to be refined over time. And it's going to be refined as circumstances change. But I think we have to focus on that part before we can get to then our witness.
Yeah. And actually, sometimes this is a good tying question is, how should our faith and our understanding of work inform our career path that we choose? How do we select jobs, especially during job transitions? How do we know what our calling is? And you shared it even in the beginning when you moved from a CEO to even working in ministry.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes we have a choice of a job and other times we are not faced with that choice. I would like us all to consider that we're called to jobs we don't like and we're called to jobs we like, and we don't always have a choice. But when we do have a choice, I think that the quality of our selection is really a reflection of our time with God and our discernment of who He's made us to be. And so there's not a formula to that. It really takes a lot of time saying, Lord, this was my work day today. Help me discern where you were in that. Help me discern what you want me to change about how I worked today. Help me understand what greater thing you might be calling me to. And then occasionally God hits you over the head with a 2x4 and says, this is the only option I'm giving you, and it's a calling far bigger than you ever wanted, but that's what I want you to do, is go out there, because I want you weak. I want you dependent on me. I want you in this very hard place. And that's where I'm putting you, and quit complaining.
Yeah, and sometimes you mentioned this, and I want to reemphasize this as well too. Sometimes it changes, right, Catherine? Sometimes that calling changes in time.
It does. Changes. I mean, I think I'm in a calling now. I love being an action person. I love having goals and accomplishing those goals. I love checking them off. And I am in a much more passive time. And I think God is saying, yes, I want you to not worry about where and what, but worry about who you are in me. And so I think there's different times we're called to different things at different seasons.
Yeah. And Catherine, you touched on this as well too, in terms of sometimes going to full-time ministry. What do you say to the individual that says, man, I think a lot of times I'm so serious about the Lord and my faith, I'm going to leave my work and then go into full-time ministry? What would you say to that person?
My response to that person would be, you are in full-time ministry where you are now. And so you're calling to a different type, maybe a church employment or parachurch employment of full-time ministry, needs to be very specific. If you have a gift of preaching, then a calling to really develop that gift is very specific. But just a calling to ministry without it being specific of what are you ministering to, I think is negating that we're called to that wide kinds of work, unlimited types of work are and can be ministry if we understand God's purposes for that work. So if you're in finance and you don't understand the horrible damage you can do to the world through your work in finance if you do it poorly, or the wonderful opportunity you can give to many people in the world through giving them access to capital, if you don't understand that as ministry, you're not seeing God's purposes for your work.
Catherine, how do you balance between doing what God wants you to do, but finding a job to make ends meet? Sometimes you just don't have a choice for where you work. How do you say, well, I really want to serve you, but I got to find anything that allows me to make ends meet?
Yeah, I mean, I think accepting God's sovereignty over our lives is really hard. It's great when things are all going well, but accepting God's sovereignty when we're in a desperate situation, when we really need a job, when we have to take a job we hate in order to keep a roof over our head, I think that's a real, it's a spiritual discipline almost, to say, Lord, how do I trust you even in this time, and trust that this is what you are calling me to now, and you have a purpose for this, both for those I'm serving and for the work you're doing in my own heart. And so the Psalms are so great for this. There's so many Psalms on, I don't want to be here, Lord. How long do I have to be in this horrible place before you are going to release me from it and put me in some place that, provides me more joy. But nonetheless, God has purposes for those times. And I think we need to be going to him, wrestling with him about what he wants us to do and to learn in those times.
This is actually a similar questions, and we have a lot of questions flowing in, Katherine. What advice would you give to someone who desires excellence and diligence in their work, but the envisioned results never materialize?
That's a great question. So we're in a broken world, and it will never be fully redeemed until Christ comes again. And so somehow our vision and our hope has to be tempered by that reality that the world is broken around us. So how does our faith, I think this is a really important thing of the difference our faith makes. How do we not stay an idealist who just, is living in some fantasy land like we're already in the new heavens and the new earth? And how do we not become a cynic who's so discouraged by the brokenness around us? We are called to bring hope in the midst of a very realistic view of the brokenness of the world. That's our calling. So we can't err on the cynic side, and we can't err on the unrealistic idealist side. We need to be bringers of hope, bringers of gospel, love, and grace and truth into that brokenness. So our vision will never be fully realized. The best things I've ever done, where I've thought, oh Lord, thank you, this is beautiful, have not lasted in this broken world. Churches that were great have fallen. People that were my best proteges have taken a turn in a different direction. I mean, there's always a brokenness, and yet we are called to see these glimpses of God at work in the midst of that brokenness. We can't do that alone because we all get discouraged. We need each other to say, don't forget that time that God did that amazing thing in your midst. Don't forget, or let me point you to what God is doing over here right now, even though you can't see it right in the midst of your environment. So I think we're called to persevere, not be a cynic, and look for the little ways God might be at work, even when the whole big picture isn't the vision that we have in mind.
And Katherine, let's go to the flip side of it, because you were a CEO, you are a best-selling author, you are now being asked to speak at different places. How do you best handle success in what you do to please God? And this person said, most of the time we are praised, but we forget that the glory belongs to God. How have you had to deal with success?
Yeah, I mean, God has maybe knew that I would not deal with it that well, and so he has limited my success significantly. I have not been so amazingly successful, as much as I wanted anyway. And I do think that in God's sovereignty, he does curtail our success for his purposes. I do think that he's active to try to make sure that, in a Tower of Babel, we do not make an empire to serve ourselves. He steps in, but sometimes he lets us really build the whole tower before he steps in. And so we need other people to bring us more down to size, I think. And so how do you bring yourself down to size when you have had some success? Well, if we're really successful in something, all you have to do is see somebody who's more successful and see what your reaction to that is. If you're sort of feeling competitive and jealous, then you're not sort of with God in pursuing excellence. You're being competitive. You're being comparative. if your scope is too small. I mean, we can never be successful enough in this broken world as Christians. It's so far more broken than we will ever be able to be successful at curing. So just broaden your eyes, broaden your scope. Say, Jesus, what do you want me to do next? Sacrificially, to be able to serve you in a way that gives you glory. I don't know. That may not have made sense the way I said it, but I hope there were some little pieces of truth in there.
Let's touch on a couple questions in terms of church. One person says, I actively serve in church. How can a church minister in its context to give people a bigger vision for work beyond just go to work and serve the church, take those skills to serve the church and all that stuff? How can the church come alongside these individuals?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really a discipleship challenge first. And it's intensive discipleship. I think God gets us in the hard things of our life, and work is one of the hard things in our life. So it's really the most fertile ground, that and maybe marriage and raising children, the most fertile grounds for really turning our hearts to Him. I think that, yeah, the church could just focus on, since we all work at something, it could do a deep dive into the gospel and work. And I think it will change the church. It will, once the church sees itself as all working out there in the world as the church for God's purposes, it both changes people's hearts, it changes the church itself, and it changes the city or the organizations we work in. So it's so powerful, I don't know how to downplay it.
Understood. Katherine, can you share a little bit about, you are a very successful female leader. What challenges how do you not only deal with the challenges in both the corporate world and the church world and continue to persevere? Someone asked, what are some of the tips that you've had to persevere?
Yeah, so we've all got strikes against us. Some of us are really short, and the contemporary world really likes tall people. And, you know, you might have a racial strike against you, or you might have a stutter, or being a woman in Silicon Valley was a strike against me. There were definitely, all kinds of marginalizations, I guess is the best way to say it. So God, in His wisdom, greater than mine, called me to it. I wish that I'd been a man that was tall and brilliant. A lot of times it would have been so much easier. But He called me as a woman to be there. So I think what we have to do is get that bigger picture of, He calls broken people. He actually likes to use us through our weaknesses. A lot of the contemporary world just says, all right, find the things you're great at and go do it. But God has a sort of reverse engineering plan and says, well, actually, I'm going to call you in some area that you're really bad at, and ask you to, at least in that area, be so dependent on me that you couldn't do anything without my help, so that you know who's boss around here. And so I think that's the way I've approached it as a woman, is saying, all right, you got me here, Lord. This is up to you. It's in your power that I'm going to do what you want me to do here. And by the way, only the work that you do will last. So what might look like a success to the world may not be what your plan is for my engagement in that particular kind of work. But whatever you achieve through it will be what lasts and what matters. And I'm going to be happy with that.
You got
And
it.
sometimes I think he's worked through my failures more than he's worked through my successes.
Thank you. Catherine, I'm going to ask you one more question, and then Mwangi, I'm going to turn it over to you as well, too. And maybe this will be a preview for us to bring you on in the future, is you talk a lot about life journey, and a lot of times the patterns of your life. Speak a little bit to these guys about the importance of your past and everything you do that informs your calling for where you are right now.
Yeah, I love to remind people how much God wants us to remember in the Bible. He's always saying to Israel, remember what I did for you in Egypt. Remember what I've done for you. Remember, remember. So I think our exercises in remembering where God has, his hand has been at work in our life for good or for ill has been really important. So the negative experiences in our life that he has then redeemed by making them useful for us in later years, you know, the hardships that made us the person we are today are really important to remember and be thankful for, as well as the extraordinarily positive people that influenced us or opened the door for us or did something positive. All those rememberings are really key. The whole part of being a Christian is being grateful for what God has done for us, both in his work on the cross, but in our daily, everyday life. I don't ever see it in the well, occasionally, rarely I see it in the moment, but in retrospect, I can remember and hold on and become more grateful for those things that have happened, good and bad. And so it's in the looking backward that you're better able to see how God has shaped you into the person he wants you to be today for his purposes today. So there's no plan B. You know, we are in the plan A for his purposes for us today. And I pray we can all live out of gratefulness for his grace in that.
Yeah. Catherine, thank you very much. And you are, Catherine and everyone, we try to have these monthly gatherings in Nairobi designed for marketplace leaders. Catherine, we actually have Shundran Thomas, who's the president of Northern Trust Assets and also associate pastor of his church in Chicago. You're this month, and the next month is Andy Crouch, and we're hoping every single month to provide an example, whether it's from different parts of the world or from Nairobi, to really be able to share examples of how they are integrating their faith and some of the things that we need to learn along the way. With that, I'm going to turn it to my good friend. Oh, yes.
One question. If you could compile the questions in chat and send them to me, yep. I'll write a response, and then Mwangi can send them out as a document.
You got it.
Okay?
You got it, Catherine. And I am saving the chat right now, and Mwangi, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. We really appreciate it. Wish you had more time to continue to engage with you. And hopefully one day we'll have you again. But thank you so much for giving us your time today and just sharing with us what God has done through your life and just the different things you've been learning. To everyone else, as Tommy has said, we hope to be doing this monthly. So please keep looking out in your emails for details of our next event. We have our next one on October the 9th. And I hope as many of you as possible will be able to join us. If you jump onto the Resource Global website currently on the events page, you will actually see the event is live. It's up there, and you can register early so that you don't have to forget. And we'll be happy to have with us as we continue to just go on this journey that's challenging us to rethink what we're doing with our faith in the different doors that God has opened for us, as we see how we can transform this city for God in the different opportunities for influence that we have. So thank you yet again, Catherine. It was a joy to have you with us. But if any of you just would like to get to know more about Resource Global, get to know more about what we're doing, please feel free to contact me as well. I'll put my contact details on the chat. and we can be able to have more conversation. We have a podcast where you can hear more stories from people like Katherine as they share their different encounters. So if you go to the website, you'll see our Up Next podcast there. You can catch us on Facebook, on Instagram. Just search for Resource Global, and you'll be able to just find out more about us, engage more with different events we have. But thank you for your time, everyone. It was a joy having you, and I hope to see you with us again next month. Tommy, anything before we close?
Yeah, just one thing, Mwangi, a lot of times when you guys go on the Up Next podcast, you're going to realize, man, there are not a lot of African voices on there, and that will be coming as Mwangi starts. He's going to host his own podcast, and we are wanting to interview you and hear your story. So I look forward to hearing some of those stories emerging out of Nairobi.
Great. Thank you, everyone. It was a joy. See you next month on the 9th of October.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.